You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another 3-Ma. I am John Kurtz, joined by just Derek Young today. No Noel NBA because he decided to ditch the pod to go to Maui for a 10-year anniversary trip with his wife. I don't know that I've ever been so offended in my life that he would miss out on a podcast for such a frivolous adventure like that and then send me Snapchats of shirtless men dancing around at a luau, but that's the situation that we're in, people. So here we are, Derek and I doing the heavy lifting here today. So is Holiday Distillery. You guys know all about them. Get your 360 vodka, get your Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon. Whatever your spirit of choice is, they've got you covered there. Great way to celebrate the Cats, enjoy your summer, take it out on the boat with you, whatever it is that you're going to be doing this summer. And as I say that, I realize Cole is my friend with a boat, so maybe I should start being a little bit nicer to him so that he will take us out on the boat with some Ben Holiday bottled and bond bourbon here before too long. But support those who support us. Holiday Distillery, great folks, great K-State people out there. And they help bring you this pod each and every week. So DY, I've gotten I feel like we had a little bit of Twitter heat, like people are wanting us to talk about basketball recruiting, what's going on in the portal right now. Feels kind of like last year in some ways where, yes, it's on a different level than things were last year. But people are kind of antsy. Everybody's kind of antsy right now. We love Tyler Perry. Thank you to him, by the way, for joining the podcast here recently. But love that kid. It's just like, hey, you've still got 3 scholarships open. You've still got 3 spots open. And visits continue to be scheduled and then kind of fall through, and who's still left. And now you're down to like grad transfers in the portal. I know Ernest Uday from Kansas is going to be a big piece of the discussion here in just a minute, but how about let's just start with the overall situation here and some of the antsiness that people are feeling about where the roster is at and what the staff's plan is right now.
I mean, I understand the angst to a point, but there will be players. I think folks just assume that the transfer portal is pretty static and that it's not going to continue to have guys trickle into it. I realize right now that the amount of talent in it is draining a little bit, and there's not, a ton of available targets worthy of Kansas State's consideration still left on the board, so to speak. But time is not still. There will be points in the future where we'll probably hear some more graduate transfers. They can enter at any moment. We saw that last year when Kansas State added guys, throughout the summer. Even at this point, they didn't have Keontae Johnson. They didn't have Desi Sills. I don't think they had Tyke Green. I don't think they had Bebe. I think Cam Carter, Jarrell Colbert, and Naquan Tomlin were probably the newcomers that had already committed at this point. So what I will say is I understand the angst. I think that's probably a pretty natural emotion to have when you're trying to build and compose the roster, and you're excited to really build off of what was accomplished last year by these same Kansas State coaches. So I don't know how it's all going to come together. You don't know how it's all going to come together, but I've counted out this staff probably more times than I'd like to admit in the past year, and each time they come out smelling like roses. So at this point, I've learned my lesson and know that they're probably going to figure out something, and it's going to be worthy of a roster that did the same things as last year or even perhaps better.
Yeah, I think, I have a lot of thoughts that bounce around. I mean, the prevailing thought to me is that, yes, I trust this staff immensely, and I think they have earned certainly the benefit of the doubt that they will figure something out and be a good competitive basketball team. Now, to me, it's like define what that is, because you said there, DY, like, hey, they'll figure it out and have a team that's going to be capable of doing what they did last year or perhaps better. I think that's where I'm like a little conflicted about it. I have no doubt that they're going to put together a tournament team. I have no doubt that they're going to put together a team that should be able to compete in the top like 4 or 5 of the Big 12 and not be some like massive step back this year. I mean, I think what they already have right now, like Naquan Tomlin, Tyler Perry, is like those two leading the charge. We could have a debate about, how that compares to Keontae and Marquise from last year. But I don't know. It felt like they still need, to me, it feels like they still would need one more big piece, whether that's going to be Keontae returning, whether that would be Ernest Uday coming in the portal, whether that was, had to be Max Asmus coming out there in the backcourt. It feels to me like if they are going to be as good as they were last year to like really legitimately compete for a Big 12 championship and be capable of a Final Four run, I think they need another bigger piece. But again, I mean, I love, respect, and trust the coaching staff. I would love to be proven totally wrong on that. But right now it feels like to me, the difference is like, is this going to be a good team or is this going to be a very good to great team? More along the lines of what they had last year. And that's where some of my antiness is. Now, whole other conversation is like, hey, man, can you legitimately expect that after 1 year? Like after these guys, just because they set the bar so damn high last year? Totally understand. But I think, Jerome Tang has come in and said expect to win and all, they raised the expectations. And so a lot of us are kind of in that sort of position because he led us there.
Yep. It's a lot to ask, and it's probably a fair ask at this point because they did set the bar so high and they want the bar this high, to their credit. I think they would probably agree with maybe the one more piece thing. If you put them on a lie detector test, they would probably feel the same way. I would argue if you do that one more piece thing, I would argue that would exceed last year's roster then, to be quite honest, because then you have three really, players that are, under the microscope, but really, really fantastic basketball players then, because you're adding another piece to what Tyler Perry and Naquan Tomlin will already give you. I think that's where I kind of fall to, is that you had two of the three best players in the Big 12 last year, in Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. But you probably didn't feel that way on May 17th. We're at May 17th. They have Tyler Perry and they have Naquan Tomlin. My argument would be that's two of the maybe 10 best players in the Big 12 going into next season. That would be my rough estimate, and that's pretty good. If you had a third piece that you're asking, I don't think they had 3 in the top 10 last year or 3 in the top 15. I don't think they were there. So if they add like that third piece, like you're inferring, I think it would exceed last year's roster. So I just don't think they're that far away, even though it probably feels that way for a fan that is just expecting splash after splash because they thought they were going to capitalize on all this momentum. And I would still argue they're still doing that. You got to remember they're in the conversation with multiple 5-stars in the 2025 class. They're in the conversation with Patrick Ngongba in the 2024 class out of Virginia, and going up against the likes of Indiana and Notre Dame and countless other schools that are probably end up getting involved, which could range from UConn to UCLA, and Kansas State's right there because of that recruiting momentum. They landed David Castillo. I remember we had a podcast over that. So I think it's understandable that the fans would feel the way that they do right now, but I also think it's important to know what they've still accomplished, not just in last year's tournament, but in the recruiting after it. They've still done some things well. And I just go back to, I think something being counted out, because I know he made people pull their hair out at times last year, is that it is not out of the question that Naquan Tomlin's one of the 3 or 4 best players in the Big 12 next year. That kind of leap, I think, is very realistic from him. Maybe top 2. He really has that kind of ceiling, and a whole off season doing what he's supposed to be doing. Another off season in the program, another year of organized basketball. I think sky's the limit for what he can do at the college level next year. And Tyler Perry, whether he's one of the top 5, top 10 players in the Big 12, people can argue on that, but he's probably a top 5 shot maker in the Big 12 next year, and I don't think anyone would debate that.
Yeah, I guess, there was a lot of debate about, at least I can remember one point late in the season, they're like, hey, will K-State ever have 2 All-Americans again? Or, how rare is it? I guess it's more the way, how rare is it that K-State would have 2 All-Americans again like they did with Keontae and Marquise? So I don't know. It's hard for me to say, hey, I think you're going to get both of those guys, Naquan Tomlin and Tyler Perry, to be on that level. So, add a third all Big 12 caliber sort of player there. And now maybe we're talking, at least as far as this roster goes. I'll also address, to say that they haven't capitalized on the momentum, I think would be a gross overstatement because, I think they have 100% capitalized on the momentum to get Perry, to get Castillo, to be in the positions that they're in with guys in like 24 and 25 and the updates that we hear about some of the, they're doing it and they're getting in conversations and getting in rooms that, K-State would have had no prayer of getting into over the last couple of years. So, it's obvious that once again, that's where you have to remind people, it's been 1 year and they're already in these sorts of conversations. However, they still do have to put the actual tangible results out there on the floor. And two things I will say about that. Yes, I'm with you. Like, Naquan Tomlin clearly has that potential. I mean, he's probably got the potential to be the best player in the Big 12, right? If we're talking about him tapping out at his ultimate, his top tier potential, that is probably there. It's just, I don't know. I need to see it. I do need to see it before I will 100% believe that. They got Marquise Noel to an elite level, but Marquise Noel also, like we know now, looking back on it, like has an incredible work ethic, like just insane work ethic. And I'm not saying that Naquan Tomlin doesn't have that. I just don't. We have not seen him go to work like Marquise Noel did, who was just crazy with his sort of work ethic that he had. And maybe, one other thing I guess we can throw in here is they do have a much better incoming freshman class this year than they did last year. And so, we're kind of writing off, I guess, Day and RJ and McCaleb, the three incoming high school recruits. Maybe one of those guys really pops and turns into like a fringe all Big 12 level sort of player because they are, just a much higher pedigree of recruit that's coming in here. So that's another thing that maybe is giving the staff a little bit more confidence in the roster than some of the fan base.
Yeah, two things I would say is I think we saw enough flashes in Naquan Tomlin last year that I feel that way already. I feel comfortable with him being one of the best players in the Big 12 next year. I saw enough flashes, especially with what an offseason could do in terms of having that drive to really get there, maybe having a taste of the NBA, the process that he's enduring right now is probably a good motivator of sorts. Secondly, that was my other point. We could say, man, they need 2 or 3 dudes like they had last year. I'd argue that they have 2 right now with Perry and Tomlin, even if they're not top 2, top 3 like Noel and Johnson were. But at the same time, they got a better supporting cast. Like you said, they got a better freshman class. They got Taj Manning coming off a red shirt, and they really, really like him. They have Jarrell Colbert coming off a red shirt. And, yeah, he's got some work to do, but he can really be a good basketball player as well. We can't just pretend like Cam Carter and David Gasson and Jarrell Colbert and Taj Manning are going to be exactly what they were last year. They should be taking leaps forward as well. So there's an argument that, well, they won't have the same top 2. That whatever the top is, they'll have a better supporting cast.
It's definitely going to look a lot different, right? Like it will not be, last year was so heavily reliant on 2 players, and this should be, and that's not, that's what we know. And we saw it be so successful, and we were all very like emotionally attached to that team, but there is a process here and probably needing to remove ourselves from that because Baylor was not, those great teams that Jerome Tang was a part of at Baylor, they were not dominated by 2 players and then kind of the rest of the gang just fill it in wherever. Like they had a lot of guys in a lot of places and a lot of depth. So I think that's the ultimate goal for what this thing is going to look like. And they're getting there. That's, again, I try to preach to myself, like some internal patience because, yeah, Castillo's coming. They're already like the guys that we're seeing them being mentioned with in the high school ranks in 24 and 25, or maybe like, having to bust out a $2 million NIL bag is not going to be as necessary to get dudes like that into the program as it is in the portal right now where you're fighting some battles there. I just see over the next couple of years them definitely developing a much deeper and more talented roster. Like it's coming. It's just this year is what, everybody's obviously hyper-focused on this year. And the portal has turned it into much more of like everybody having more realistic expectations of just reloading every single year. So I think that whole dichotomy and that kind of struggle for the fan base is at play there too.
Yeah, if I was going to make like I don't even know how bold it is, but a bold prediction, I would say the difference between this past season and next season, or this upcoming season, however you want to phrase it, is that the upcoming one, the roster, I think maybe it's not going to be as good 1 through 2, but it probably will be better 1 through 10, 1 through 11, 1 through 12, 1 through 13. I think that's probably a conclusion that you can probably come to already, and I feel good about it.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so as far as specific targets go and where K-State turns in the portal for the rest of the year, let's take a break and we'll come back and discuss that, starting with Ernest Udeh, the transfer from the University of Kansas. That's next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
So some pretty big news that we saw at DUI was that Ernest Udeh, who's transferring from Kansas in the wake of Hunter Dickinson coming in for that massive NIL bag, he is visiting Duke, but he also has plans, at least after the dead period, to visit K-State and TCU. The skepticism there is whether or not he actually makes it to the latter two of those visits, because obviously Duke is the heavy hitter there. But I mean, it seemed like the thought was he was leaving Kansas because of playing time. How much playing time would really be there at Duke, I think, is one of the questions that probably needs to be discussed here. Obviously, NIL would come into play with a guy as talented as this. But where do you, let me just frame it to you like this. How realistic is it that, one, K-State even gets that visit, and two, that K-State would be a major player here in his recruitment?
Well, I think they would be a major player if he got through that dead period without committing it and took that visit to Manhattan. I think that would be a sign of that that he's heavily considering Kansas State, and maybe was however you want to phrase it. But at this point, and speaking to different folks, I think Duke's going to be the pick, and smart people that kind of know what's going on there don't think he ends up visiting either one of Kansas State or TCU.
So why? I don't know. It just, I guess I understand why, but it feels like some of these recruitments, it's like, why do they even line up like all these other visits? I mean, if something is going to falter, it's frustrating when we've seen this happen before, where it feels like, a guy's lining up a bunch of visits, and like the first one is where they're obviously going to wind up going. The other thing with Duke, DY, is like, what is the actual playing time situation there like for him? Because that would seem to be pretty important here. I assume this wouldn't just be all about money and Duke being able to throw a bunch more money at him.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the whole money aspect, especially in association with the transfer portal, but I would assume in most cases, not all, but there's going to be a multitude of factors, and playing time is certainly one of them. That's why Uday said peace out to KU, right? So because they have KJ Adams coming back, they just got Hunter Dickinson. But at Duke, they have a really good incoming class. I think it's like 4 or 5 stars, and obviously Kyle Filipowski chose to come back, but he probably is going to play the 4. I think he did that this past year, and Uday can probably start. Now, maybe he's not a central part of what they're going to do from an offensive standpoint or defensive standpoint. That's a better question for John Shire, the head coach. But I kind of understand it. There's probably more navigation there in terms of roster talent. Obviously, the way Duke recruits 1 through 13 to navigate, and he'll have guys that he really has to beat out. But I still think that he would not start at Kansas, but I think he would start at Duke, because if they were searching for any particular starting spot, it was the 5.
What would you say to people who have those NIL concerns? Because like just today, I was seeing a lot of discussion out there among the fan base about where that's at, where K-State sits, and is this a part of the reason that K-State has not been as successful in the portal as most would have wanted them to be?
I don't think Kansas State is. The transfer portal NIL will come into play a lot more than any other part of recruiting. And what I will say is like you're probably more apt to be more competitive with battles like the one that you engaged with Tyler Perry. That's probably more of a wheelhouse. Just having those deeper connections, just because those relationships and ties can overcome any deficit that there might be in NIL. I don't think that there's always a deficit, though. I think chalking up every loss as a product of NIL is kind of a little bit of a loser mentality. It doesn't have to be that. And I don't think the Kansas State coaches view it that way. I think that they're probably not as resource plentiful as some of the other programs, even maybe some peer programs. Like there's some that really have established quite a war chest that are probably what some would want to consider a peer program to Kansas State.
Oh, shoot, man. I just saw Texas Tech's giving their entire baseball team 5-figure scholarships today. So
yeah, so I would say Texas Tech comes to mind. And I think Kansas State probably needs to look at themselves in the mirror a little bit and come along a little bit further when it comes to that, just so they don't, establish a gap so wide between them and Texas Tech. I think they need to be competitive. But I don't think they're in danger of being lapped or anything. I just think that they probably have a little bit of work to do. But guess what? When it comes to the transfer portal and NIL, that's also the reason why Kansas State is able to, and what we've seen, have been more competitive on the high school recruiting front when it comes to both football and basketball, because with all the money going towards NIL, it means it's less impactful on the high school recruiting front. So you just put in your due diligence and really do the work. You can really attract talent that way. Now you have to keep it. So there's three, and I know the folks actually on the national side of On3 have really covered it well, but there's really like 3 NIL coffers, and there's probably not even 15 or 20 programs that can take advantage of all 3. You kind of got to pick your lane. One is, do you use it to recruit the high school route? 2 is, do you use it to keep your roster intact from letting guys enter the transfer portal? And 3, do you use it to use it on guys you want from the transfer portal? There's not a whole lot of teams, programs, schools out there that can use it all 3 ways. You kind of got to be strategic in how you want to do it, but also having, the kind of locker room, coaching staff, player relationship goes a long way in keeping guys intact too. We've seen it this past year on both for, since we cover these 2, football and basketball. They're losing the guys that they are okay with losing.
I've got 2 solutions here, DY. All right, 2 solutions on how K-State can step up their game. 1, can we find a way to tie NIL to like a nice conference center that we place on campus so that we can get $50 million from state taxpayers? That would be number 1. We could do that. That'd be great. Number 2 would be if someone could just get me in contact, put me in a room with Paul Edgerly. All right, let me talk to the man. I think I could figure it out, DY. Like I'm a pretty persuasive guy. I think we could, we could get some of the money flowing out of there. Just a little drop in the bucket, and it would make K-State a major player here. So that's my 2-pronged plan as to how K-State can get around this problem and spend like nobody else in the portal or wherever else.
What I will say is I don't think there's a tremendous gap to bridge. There is a gap to bridge, not a tremendous one, and some of it has to be, school. Too. I mean, there has to be a little bit more. The 2 sides have to coalesce a little bit. I think one of the sometimes detractors can be that, they might see it as a competition to the Ahern Fund. And I think those 2 need to work in tandem a little bit more.
Yeah. I think that's, especially if you're a KSO subscriber and you've seen some of that conversation. And we talked to Curry Sexton here on the pod too, about just the overall situation with some of that. So yeah. But it's good to hear that it's not like some DEFCON 5 sort of situation right now. And to tie it all back together and kind of in this portion of the conversation, the fact that they are doing well in the high school recruiting ranks, especially on the basketball front, that gives me, because we're having this basketball centric discussion, that I think is where the money's really going to be made. Tang clearly, when NIL becomes a little bit less of a factor, is just going to be a monster with high school recruiting, and that's going to help you build very sturdy rosters, and hopefully would not have to deal with as much in the portal then moving forward after that. Okay, Ray J. Dennis has been another hot name guard transfer from Toledo that was long thought to be like an Illinois lean, but we haven't really seen a lot of movement on that front. I mean, at one point, Trilly Donovan, who you should all be following on Twitter. I mean, if you want, I say that half jokingly, but like if you want legit news on where people are going in the portal, that guy has not been wrong very much. He was suggesting K-State was going to get a visit at one point in time there, but it has not happened. Where do you think things stand on K-State and Ray J. Dennis?
I probably can't say one way or another if Kansas State will get a visit or not. I think he's visited now. Baylor, Michigan, Illinois, Utah. All signs continue to point to Illinois.
Wait. He visited Utah?
Sounds like it. That's what it like just before or like yesterday or the day before, I think. Would have been Monday, Tuesday-ish. I think.
Is Utah even? Do they play basketball?
Yeah, man. Hey, man. I'm just giving you the news. Okay. Don't kill the messenger. But technically, he could take more trips. Will he? I don't know. The one thing to note: it's May 17th as we're recording this. I don't know when you're going to be listening to it, but there's another dead period, which there's a part of me that thinks having dead period in the transfer portal cycle just randomly in the month of May is very strange to me. But there is another dead period that's randomly 8 days long, May 18th to May 26th. So there'll be a lull in visits for everyone at that point.
That is a weird one. I kind of thought the same thing. Like, what are we doing that for? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know if it's for the NBA process. I don't know. It's kind of
Yeah,
silly.
yeah, maybe so. Okay, well, speaking of that, we are going to get to Keontae and Marquise, both of them, and their NBA prospects here. But Damian Collins is the one other name that had been thrown around quite a bit. Kentucky transfer, unbelievably talented, insane athlete, but had not produced much at all through two. Unfortunately for him, kind of tragedy-ridden a couple of years where he dealt with a lot of personal stuff that would be tough for anybody to deal with. But another one where it seemed like K-State had a visit, then the visit got canceled. What do we know about that? And is K-State totally out on the Damian Collins thing?
I would say that they're not connected anymore, and I think that's, I don't know the details, but I think K-State has pivoted away more than anything.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll step aside. When we come back, Keontae Johnson talked to Andy Katz, said the plan is to stay in the draft. I guess, presumably, as long as he is medically cleared, which does not seem to be a certainty as of right now. So we'll talk about Keontae, where that sits, and then Marquise Noel balling out at the G League Combine, but not getting an invite to the NBA Combine. That's next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
All right, so let's start with this tweet here from Andy Katz. Is he with the NCAA now anymore? Yeah, digital reporter, analyst, and host for NCAA. One of the national voices in college basketball. He says, Keontae Johnson just came through our NBA TV room and said he will know next week if he's been medically cleared. His plan is to stay in the draft and not go back to K-State. He's here in Chicago doing interviews and medical evaluations. He was not able to go through like the scrimmaging that was happening because he had not been medically cleared here yet. Is it fair enough to say that like the whole situation seems to be, hey, if he can get cleared, he's just going to go through the draft process and begin his professional career. If he can't, then there would be a decent shot that he returns to K-State, kind of hinging on all that right now.
Yeah, that's how, him mapping it out that way, I would probably just go along with what he said. I haven't heard a lot of details on how it's unfolding, or I'm not really behind the scenes with that, the way that Andy Katz, at least temporarily, was. But I'd imagine that's probably the game plan. I think it always was. I think he looked for a shot last year. Kansas State was the school that gave him a shot because he still had dreams of playing in the NBA, and he needed to prove himself again. Hard to deny what he did on the court. All Big 12, nearly Big 12 Player of the Year, All-American, took Kansas State to the Elite Eight. I think he's trying to parlay that into an NBA career, which I would too. And if all goes right from a medical standpoint, I don't know why he wouldn't stay in the draft. Now, if for some reason that doesn't go his way, then I think that's the route, the avenue, so to speak, of a potential return. But even if he's not cleared, I don't know that it's a slam dunk that he would go back to Kansas State. He could still, I think, explore a professional route, even if it's overseas at that point.
Well, pardon the language, it's just a shitty situation to be in where it's like, hey, if he comes back, it's going to be because he gets really devastating news for his career. That would suck. And I don't know. I have no real idea what the medical evaluation process is like at the NBA level versus the college level. But we do know, a part of the reason he wound up at K-State is because not everywhere was willing to actually clear him to play. So there does seem to still be some dispute. And when you're talking about the NBA, you're talking about somebody who's going to be investing, 6-7 figures in him. And so that's, I presume, why people would assume that the NBA process would be a little bit more rigorous there. Do I have that assumption correct?
Your guess is as good as mine on that, because I guess I just look at it from my perspective, which is probably a little bit skewed. It's weird for me that, Kansas State would clear them and take on that liability, but a big, what do you want to call it, organization, like the NBA is unwilling to do so. The consistency or lack thereof there kind of perplexes me. But I'm not a billionaire running $1 billion business, so maybe you do. Maybe you have more more insight on how that goes.
No, I mean I don't know much about the NBA at all, but I was just like a little surprised with all that. I was assuming he would be participating in the combine, and I just thought that stuff was already taken care of. But the way that this has started to play out, it looks like that is kind of the situation there. I mean, I will say this: the way the staff has handled wings in the portal, which is not really entertaining many at all, even though it seemed like there were guys that they could have had a shot. You know, what was the Tyson kid from Texas Tech who wound up going to Cal? I mean, it didn't seem like they really moved on that at all. So the way that they are operating in the portal, it seems like they still believe that there's at least a somewhat viable chance that Keontae would wind up back.
Well, I think it's greater than zero. I just don't know how much greater than zero. And speaking to Jerome Tang, would have been on Wednesday morning in Salina as part of the Catbacker tour. It seemed like their approach, like for the rest of the way on these three spots, was a guard, a big, and best player available. So whether that's a wing or not, that's just not something they honed in on from a specific standpoint. I mean, we're not on the staff. We can only take in what they're telling us, but it just doesn't seem like that's like tremendously high on the priority list for one reason or another.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Marquise Noel, it would be great if he could get drafted, find a spot in the league, just to continue to give K-State some publicity. Great ambassador. Obviously a wonderful story. Everybody is rooting for him. Seemed like he had a great day at the G League Combine. He certainly was hitting the highlight reels all over the place. I do think I read he had like 5 turnovers or something too. So it seemed like a pretty, par for the course sort of Marquise Noel performance. Lots of threes. He had the 3 and turn away Steph Curry thing going a couple of times. He threw just some dazzling passes. I mean, looked great. A lot of those who were in attendance really raved about his actual performance there. But then he doesn't there were like 8 guys, I think, that got the invite from the G League Combine to the actual NBA Combine. He was not on that list. And I mean, I think there's basically one reason why. It's the fact that he measured like 5'6" 3/4, I believe it was at the G League Combine. So it may just be a height thing for him. I think he's probably going to have to just earn his way in with, some sort of undrafted opportunity. But I still believe that the guy has enough to at least get a cup of coffee in the league. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be a regular in the league, but I'm done doubting him, man. I'm done doubting him on whatever it is that he's wanting to do. And I'm sure this is just going to light that fire under him even more.
Yeah, I'm done doubting him too, but you alluded to it. Basically, that told me that it didn't matter what he did. He could have been the best player in basketball that we've ever seen on those 2 days, and there was nothing that he could have done that would have grabbed an invite. They just said, "Oh, that's awesome. You tore everybody up, but you're 5'6", so you're not invited to the NBA Draft Combine." I mean, that's what it was, right? He dazzled everyone. He was tremendous. Might have been the best performance out of everyone during the scrimmages, and it didn't matter. They still didn't invite him. So,
yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. My heart kind of breaks for him on that, but Lord knows that will just get into him even more. That's going to get into him and inspire him even more. So, I mean, I'll be excited to see how all that plays out. I mean, it's understandable with the hype, but it's not totally unprecedented. I mean, how freaking tall was? I'm looking up Nate Robinson right now.
Yeah, I will say the league's a lot different.
Okay, Isaiah Thomas.
The league is a lot different now. I will say that. He's probably not going to be able to do much near the basket at all, even if he does penetrate. Although he can penetrate to create for others. And defensively is where he would probably be at tremendous odds in the NBA. I'm not sure there's a whole lot that he can defend. But.
How dare you, DY? Heart over height. Damn it, I screwed up his own catchphrase.
Height over height. Come on.
Well, that's what the NBA says. The NBA says right now that it is height over heart. But we know that's messed up, man. That's not how this thing goes. So, DY, when he's out there dunking on people in the NBA, I'll remember this conversation. Okay.
Did we ever see him dunk the ball at K-State?
I don't think so. No, I don't think that we did. But I saw him. He had a 39-inch max vert at the combine, which wasn't bad.
Yeah, I think it was the second highest. So again, nothing mattered.
Well, because that's supposed to be one of the knocks against him too, is that he's not like overly athletic, right? And then I saw that vertical and I was like, damn, man, I don't know. That seems pretty good.
I don't know that people think he's not overly athletic.
I heard an NBA draft guy on local radio the other day saying
Well, you better listen to a different one.
Okay. I just caught that and I was like, I mean, I don't know. That seems really fair for Marquise, but hey, man, wishing him all the best. Any closing thoughts here, DY, on K-State hoops, since that is predominantly what we've discussed here?
But you don't have to do it, but I will give you my approach. Even though we're sitting here on May 17th, they've only added one player. They had 4 open spots. Now they have 3. I am reserving judgment until we know what they have accomplished, because I'd hate to once again, count them out and then to prove me wrong again, because that's likely what would happen.
Well, I'm not counting them out. But I will also say that I'm a little antsy, but definitely not doubting them or counting them out. So we shall see. But hopefully that will put concerns to rest at least a little bit for everybody out there. I would say trust the process, but how things are going in Philly these days, I don't think I should be stealing that one anymore. Look at that. I know a little bit about the NBA. That was a good little
What
NBA.
I know about the NBA is like everyone that narrowly missed the finals got fired.
That seems to be the deal in the NBA these days, man. People was it the Raptors coach who got fired after being coach of the year a couple of years ago?
Nick Nurse, he got fired. Monty Williams took Phoenix pretty far. He got fired. The Bucks, they fired their coach.
No, he got fired?
Yeah, the Bucks had the best record in the East and fired their coach.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Tough gig, man. Tough gig. All right. Appreciate Holiday Distillery helping bring you the pod. As always, make sure you get your 360 vodka, your Penn Holiday bottled and bond bourbon. We appreciate them. We appreciate Jordan Foote keeping us on the ones and twos in the background as well. We appreciate Cole Manbeck, who is enjoying a Mai Tai and a luau right now in Maui. So thank you to everybody. Thanks for listening to the pod. We will talk to you again soon.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts, bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.